porch. You can see the screen door off to the side, the remnants. The front door is totally consumed. That's the front door on your left. That's a side window that led into what they were using as their living room. That's the porch above, the ceiling above the porch. Quite a bit of the fire entered into that area, coming out the windows, kind of rolling around, not unusual. That's standing in the front doorway, looking down the hallway. We've heard a lot about different V patterns there. As you can see, some off on the sides, or at this point they're not necessarily relevant. That's the kitchen in the background. The bedroom where the fire originated is to your left there. You can see one of the beds. You see a Christmas tree off here down in the foreground. That's the room that is off to the right. Had very little fine pigment in it. That is looking in the bedroom where the fire originated. There's one of the beds. There's one of the other beds. That is the doorway that we're looking into from the hallway. It would be the windows would be over here off to your right. That's the same bed again that we were looking at in the previous photograph that's protruding outside of the doorway. Those are the two windows that have the east orientation. So all in all, there were two windows in the front, two windows on the side, and one small window on the back. Those are the two windows again. Here you can see the electric socket. It's an older house, been wired after the fact, and you can see the actual electric line running up, and there's it still has its protective cover. And then at the very top, I think you can see that the wire has been exposed. There's what was identified at the time by the investigators. Additional patterns. These are all inside that room, pretty much the center of the room. That's showing the depth. The particular floor had a carpet over it, and underneath that there was a linoleum. Underneath that there was some tar paper, and then there was a 3-inch plywood and a 3/4-inch plywood, and then the actual original flooring material, as you can see there, at least touching. That's the front entryway. A lot's been talked about there. That's where the sample was ultimately taken. You can see the various discolorations. I guess somebody might call that the old spalling up top. On the other side, on the concrete, there was a separation, approximately an inch, between the patio and the actual house that was built. That's not unusual in that kind of construction. Here you have that bed. That's the bed again that is kind of protruding out from the front door. There's the heater that was in the southeast corner of the bedroom. That's the back, that's the south window that we saw earlier, the small window. There would be two other windows over here. The particular bed that we've looked at would have been in front over this direction. That's where the two bodies were found. You can see the location from the door. The doorway would be straight ahead here to your left. You can see the two windows in the front porch there to your right. There's where the sample was taken from the doorway. That's the remnants of two pool cues and the bottle of charcoal lighter fluid. This right here is the end of the patio as you're moving to the left. If you're looking at the house, it would be the patio, the doors on the right over here. It's at the end of the patio. There you can see the first step down. That's another picture of the front doorway. You can see where the sample had been removed. This is the ceiling. You look right here in the middle, right off to the side back over there. I believe you can see where the ceiling fan is located. That's another picture of it. There, the ceiling fan location, the box is over here off to the left, as you can see it. That's another picture of the main area of the pour area that they indicated, that they identified, and that's from the window. And there's the original drawing done by Corsicana Fire Department where they believe there was evidence of an accelerant. I place this here because I just want to show that, you know, what we're looking at, we've talked about the scientific methodology and the hypothesis drawn from those. This is strictly straight out of 921. There's talking about the evidence levels of confidence. I think we'd be interested in this. Probability and possibility. This is an excerpt from Mr. Byler's report. During his presentation, I was somewhat taken back in the fact that it seems like I'm not really sure what reports he was reading, because once there was evidence of an accelerant that they felt they had seen, that's immediately what they did. They started taking samples. During the course of all of this, I've seen numerous programs, and it's amazing how, I guess, people want to make a good story out of something. This statement right here, it just minimizes, it seems to me, what the facts actually are. If you find an accelerant over here, evidence, the container, and the door wells over there, it automatically stands to reason that that explains the presence of that accelerant that you found over here, because something was being used over here. And we saw one of the pictures in Nightline where they were scoping across that front porch, and they're telling their public viewers with a circle, here's where the accelerant was found, you know, in the middle of the porch. Here's where the, and that's not the case. That was not the case with a barbecue pit or anything. All the way at the end, good 20 feet away. There's been a lot of discussion, and I'll refer to my experts over here in terms of in NFPA about what's termed the negative corpus. It's a terminology that's used, and I think this kind of understand it's when you can't explain a fire any other way, is there a possibility for you to reach the conclusion that it was an incendiary fire? Very difficult, obviously, very difficult situation. This gets into what NFPA is talking about, the purpose of fire and explosion investigation. The features can be grouped under the following 4 headings. Of significance in this one is, I think, number 4 here. I think, Ms. Carradine, you've raised several questions, I know, in previous meetings about the nature of the human factor, and as you can see there, the It encompasses acts or omissions contributed to the law, such as incendiarism and negligence. My presentation today, I'll tell you, is not going to deal anything with that defendant, his conduct at all. We will be talking about, though, and again, I go back to Dr. Beeler's comments. I don't know where he said we did not, our folks and the Corsicana folks didn't talk to people. They talked to all the witnesses. They talked to all of the witnesses. The neighbors, the first responding firefighters. In fact, most of those people testified in court. So I really do not understand where he's coming from, that we did not follow some sort of accepted protocol and that we did not talk to witnesses. They talked to all of the witnesses that were there. We have some problems with this particular one, and where Mr. Betters was writing in here, the injuries could not be created by Mr. Vasquez's view of the fire is correct. It's unclear how Willingham could have entered a room with gas and layers. And I didn't want to get into that, but again, I think it minimizes what actually happened when he makes those statements. We were recently in a meeting with a large group of fire marshals, and the comment was made about how derogatory both of the gentlemen here have said they're incensed somewhat about this. The fire tells a story. They all indicated that back in the early 90s when they were going through training, that's exactly the language that the instructors used. I mean, it seems to me that that's totally insignificant. The fact that the gentleman uses a phrase, the fire tells a story. I can't find anything where anybody would go anywhere with that one. We know ultimately the decision is to the level of certainty and data collected in the investigation or any hypothesis drawn from any analysis of the data rests with the investigator. This is a significant portion here. Now go into the investigation that was done by Mr. Fogg. He indicated we initially started looking for accidental causes. This is strictly Mr. Fogg, of course, the fire department. The stop along the east wall, the gas left along the east wall, we found it in the off position. They eliminated the space heater. They determined that space heater had been off. We started looking for electrical shorts from wiring, which was visible in the bedroom. We found no electrical shorts in the bedroom. We started going to the deep burn, lowest burn areas. Those were in the hallway and in that bedroom. We have to settle in our own minds that we've eliminated all accidental causes. Significant down the last one, we have to take a look at all the contents that were in the room to determine they could have left these impressions. As you go through the debris, removing the debris off the floor, we found clothes, we found toys, plastic toys on the floor. To eliminate the plastic toys melting and running, we looked at the area around the remains of the plastic toys to determine whether they had run and produced these patterns. We found that they had not. All right. The last statement is where he's indicating that he was following the professional protocol by not trying to go through the fire scene with Mr. Vasquez. Now, we've heard discussion about eliminating the possibilities. Of course, the first two possibilities are going to be gas and electric. There's no way I could sit here and defend the lack of specificity that appeared in either one of the reports. When I first started working for the office in 1994, that was one of the first critical things that I brought to the attention of the office. You know, the brevity of writing a report could be very critical at some point in time. But as you can see from here in the analysis, as you saw, that it wasn't like they just walked in and said, oh, you know, look around and say, it's not electric, it's not fire. I mean, it's not gas. I think you saw the photographs yourself of the ceiling fan. There's no evidence of fire originating there at all. They followed the protocols. They followed the practices that were available, being used at the time. Mr. Vasquez testified he used a systematic method, starting with perimeter examination, exterior examination, interior examination, going from least burn to most burn. And I conclude with irregular patterns are common in situations of post-flashover conditions. Long extinguishing times or building collapse. We didn't have building collapse. We did have somewhat of a long extinguishing. Actually, we didn't have a long extinguishing time from the sense that it took the fire department a long time to put the fire out. From the best of our knowledge on a time frame, one of the witnesses said, pretty for certain, it looks like, she let children out the door at 10 o'clock because she knew a TV show was just started. The children were the first ones to notice the fire, and they all agreed it was probably about 12 minutes. The child that actually noticed the fire indicated their first recollection was, I smelled smoke. I didn't do anything about it. And then I started seeing more, and I thought the house next door was on fire. Now this is coming from, this is the house that burns. This is the house she thought was burning because of the smoke she was seeing from being in the backyard, and the house was down. But as you can see from here, you can see how the individuals, you know, they consider a flashover situation. As you can see, these patterns may result from the effects of hot gases, flaming and smoldering debris, melted plastics, or ignitable liquids. I think what you've heard today, and there's a lot of confusion about that, is just because you have the flashover situation, it doesn't totally remove any pattern persistence that might be discernible. It's a judgment call. It is. It ultimately comes down to a judgment call. You saw from the other slide, the previous slide, that based on that judgment call and the finding, the positive finding of an accelerant where it shouldn't be, was the basis of their conclusion. Now, I just close out kind of the presentation because ultimately today and then what happened at trial was an argument over what I just talked about in terms of an opinion that falls on basically these. There's the sample that was taken. These are what were determined to be evidence of accelerant. And I dare say today that if we had a case like this, and that evidence was presented and brought, we could have an expert on one side and an expert on one side. And we could probably go on for 2 or 3 days arguing about whether that was sufficient. And ultimately the jury would make that decision. what transpired back then, very similar. The new science, if you will, that has been brought to our attention, the crazing of glass, that was in 921, that, in its original inception. When the fire investigators, and we can turn this off now if you want. The fire investigators that went in there were noting their responsibility was to note all of what were called indicators. They marked down, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this. They're not focusing on just one thing. Ultimately, when we talk in terms of using the scientific methodology and developing hypotheses, once they started looking at the culmination of, and even, again, you can throw out the crazed glass, you can throw out the spalling, you could throw out even the multiple points of origin, because in essence what they were saying was all this pattern is tied together so it ultimately would flow together. Our position has been, and I think we stated, our original document that we sent to you listed all of the various indicators that they had found. And our purpose in doing that was showing that back then, while there was no specific written standard that we would look at now and say somewhat, we, as attorney, I say codifying, but it's written, there wasn't one. There was, in fact, and I think you would agree, that there was a standard that was acceptable protocol using procedures, policies, understanding, training that they had received. And they followed it. They followed it and wrote the report and came to their conclusion.
While I think there has been some discussion about whether or not there was a standard previously, from what I have heard, I think everybody agrees that there was not a uniform written standard.
Absolutely not. There was not.
But there was perhaps some sort of standard that did not have near the detail that exists today, even if it wasn't uniform or codified, and that it was more or less accumulated knowledge.
I would agree with that. It was peer accepted to an extent, and I'm sure you had some rogues out there that, you know, didn't necessarily follow it, but there was a body of peer accepted principles. And I think, again, I want to reiterate, that was the purpose in that document that we gave you that listed those. They were all there in 921 at its inception.
One of the things that I had asked Mr. DeHaan about was the nature of judgment making in the course of a fire investigator. And I made an obvious comparison to toxicology, which I think has more specific areas for comparison. Do you agree or disagree that there continued to be, back in 1991 and under 921, lots of room for fire investigators to exercise discretion and judgment in forming their opinions? Is this whole thing some sort of mathematical formula?
There is no math. It is a judgment call ultimately coming down to opinions. And that is something now, I'm diverse here, but I think the background and history is important on this. That there is an underlying tension, if you will, and I defer to you all at some point in time, between the scientific community and those folks that are actually doing the down dirty field work out on the ground. That has existed for a long time. There have been numerous attempts to create a certification process, if you will, for just a new one called a fire analyst. And that's happened through the NFPA process, and it's been defeated. And the purpose of that was to say, we are the only ones that can make the call. We're the only ones that are trained sufficiently to make that call.
One of the I think, bigger, important, overriding task that the Forensic Science Commission faces, and it's something I think we've discovered in the course of this and other cases that we've talked about, is the notion of how does a community, and for this we're just going to limit it to Texas, know when it is the right time to take a field and make it a field that has to be more specifically accredited or certified for individuals, as we have done in a fair number of fields. Certainly in the example DNA, there are very rigid rules about who can do the testing and rigid rules about interpretation of